Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you.
Welcome back, legends, to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today we are building on our last episode where we dived into the intricate details of our hunt against all odds a couple of years ago with that limited entry tag that I had in the US. Today we're going to expand on it and just talk about a few take-home messages and truths that we learnt, a few pros and cons that we learnt from the hunt, and things that we're hopefully putting into action right now in the US. As regular listeners, I'm sure you guys are aware that hopefully we are in the thick of it. Ayden and I have 6 tags at the moment. So as you're hearing this, hopefully we've tagged a few of them and are continuing producing some awesome footage and content for you guys to watch and listen to in the weeks to come. But what we're also going to be doing today is talking about mental toughness, and that is just taking it that next step further on the mountain, grinding it out and pushing past your limits, and just a few tips and tricks and handy things that we've learned along the way to, just be able to go that next step further. So what we're also going to be doing is going to be answering your frequently asked questions. As always, if you guys have a question, please email us at info@twinelements.com.au with the subject line FAQ, as well as send us a message on the Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors account on Instagram. Let's jump into this podcast.
Option Archery makes specialist hunting gear. I'll never not be able to use Equivalizer again. They're truly one of my favourite bits of kit. It combines a stabilizer and equivalizer to increase the functionality of my hunting strategy. It enables me to put my bow on my shoulders, which enables me to glass more when I'm out in the field. Shop both equivalizers and their option sight range today by heading to the website.
So as James said there, we're going to be looking at and discussing some of the takeaways from our Against All Odds adventure. And I guess it's important to state that coming home from any hunting trip, it's always important to sort of reflect and look back on, I guess, what worked well. And we were obviously successful in taking a really nice bull elk on that adventure. But there were also plenty of things that, looking back, we either didn't do quite well, or if we had have done better, would have made the trip even more successful. So this obviously helps, like in retrospect, being able to look back and make little adjustments and things, or be mindful or considerate of. And I think that's just helped shape James and I to becoming better and better hunters. As we've sort of obviously got more experience over a long time now. We've sort of been hunting since the age of 4, bow hunting for the last 20 years. It's one of those things that a trip to the USA, whilst it seems daunting, once you go over there and experience it and sort of liken it to a lot of the hunts we've actually done, a lot of the actual, things that lead to success are very much the same as you'll find out here when we start talking about, I guess, mental fortitude, mindset, preparation, all these sorts of things. So, on a hunt of this magnitude where we spent over 20 days in the USA, sort of hills and mountains of Montana hunting elk, there were certainly plenty of things to take away. And James and I have just constructed a little bit of a list as, things that we did well and things that we, can work on for this trip as you're hearing it. And hopefully we're implementing those things along our journey.
So I think the biggest thing that we did, and I think we continue to do, was prepare physically for this trip. Putting in a lot of time on the Stairmaster or just hiking around the mountains meant that we could really, put in the miles and do massive days whilst we were out there with very little sort of adjustment period. We'd already done the preseason per se, to put it back to a sporting reference. Like we rocked up, boots on the ground, ready to go. And I think just being able to utilize our time to its full potential really, ultimately led, I think, to us being success, obviously taking it down to the wire, but really enabled us to be able to hunt hard day after day. Like we said, and we've spoken about, 20 days doing big Ks, big massive days in terms of actual time being awake and stuff like that. Most days only getting sort of 6 hours of sleep. And I think a lot of that just came especially to the physical preparation that we had before the trip. And hopefully, we've done the same this time as well. So I think that was definitely a big one for me.
You hear this a lot, and like you mentioned pre-season there as, you know, a period in where sporting people obviously get fit for the season ahead, and to take it and talk more about sports, and this is just something where it's relevant for me because I've heard a lot with I watch a bit of basketball, and people often talk about like team constructs and floors and ceilings and things, just to put it and use a bit as an example here. But a lot of, you know, basketball teams, for example, would rather a team where their floor is really high, and they often talk about, you know, things like a really good defense means that they're always in the game, and then even if their offense isn't working, they're at least in the game because they don't let their opponents score. And whereas if you're basing solely, and this is a basketball example, so it might not resonate with everyone, but hopefully I'll bring it around in a sec. But if you're a team and your ceiling is really high, like you can go and score 150 points, and when you do that, no other team is ever going to catch you. But then your floor is not scoring 150 points some games, and your defense is terrible, and you let the other team score 130. And on those nights when you're not absolutely firing, you can only score 100 points. There's a massive variation there. And I think that sort of for us is where our flaw as hunters, we don't really let ourselves get unfit. You know, like we don't really have an on season and an off season for hunting. We just try and be as fit as possible. And I remember going into this Montana like elk trip a couple of years back now, and just thinking, you know, I don't want to be the weakest link on this team. And again, it was only James and I, so a 2-person team, but I didn't want to be, you know, unfit or climbing up the mountain going, oh shit, I should have put more effort in. And I don't think there was really ever a case of being like, oh, I'm unfit. And I think fitness, as what James is saying, is one of the most important things, and probably what we did really well. Because we were so fit going into it, there weren't really days where the next day after doing a big day, we were like, oh, we can't keep doing this, or we need a day off, or we need to sleep in, or we need to just sit on the mountain and sort of rest and recover. We were able to kind of go, if there is an opportunity that presents, we're going to run to it and chase it, and our muscles and everything are ready to go. And I think that was really important for ultimately sort of achieving what we wanted to do.
And I think that just meant that no opportunity was too far away. And I think we were able to capitalize on a few opportunities that a lot of other people didn't end up in result in, you know, killing that bull. But I think there was a few opportunities I can think of, one in particular where we pretty much ran like the whole drainage to go and get to a bull with packs on, probably like 15, 20 kilo packs. Like our day packs were quite heavy. And I just think like, you know, we pretty much sprinted down there, you know, where a lot of people would have been like, oh, that's a really long way away. And I mean, we ended up getting in on the bull. That was the day where they had the switch up. But ultimately, like that was an opportunity that we could capitalize on because of our fitness. And I think another one that sort of similarly was just hunting like all day, and especially making sure you're catching that first, you know, 20 minutes of light, like not sleeping in, and especially that last little bit, you know, before dark, where a lot of people like, oh, you know, there's not that much happening. We'll cruise back and go, you know, like start walking back early or whatever. Whereas for Ayden and I, like it really was like a dusk till dawn, or even before that, sort of a day. And yeah, you know, I'm not going to lie, like the days that it was really hot, like, you know, especially for me, I would go and nap for an hour or two in the middle of the day because there was like nothing happening, especially earlier on in the trip. As it got later on and there was more activity during the day, like we'd just hunt all day. But I think, and the same here with like, I would rather in Australia, like I would rather hunt the first hour of light and be there, like make sure you're like there before light. Like you don't want to be, it's like the whole thing where it's like, I'd rather be like an hour early than a minute late, because that's often when that big boar like slinks off the paddock or the improved pasture, or that's when like, you know, the couple of red deer, you know, move off, or that's where, you know, the pig moves off the swamp or whatever. Like, so I just think about that all the time, especially with hunting. Like, to be honest, in day-to-day life, I'm not the best with that whole expression, but it definitely rings true for me, where it's like, I would rather be an hour early than a minute late. And I think we did that really well, where we hung on well past last light glassing and trying to locate animals, and we were up well and where we wanted to be on a glassing knob. It's not that you're walking up the hill in the light, it's like you are at your glassing knob at first light. And I think we did that really well as well.
Yeah, for me, that's simply put, just, prime time. You obviously want to be hunting the animals when they're most likely to be killed or be, distracted. And that's where being able to physically, like, not walking up the mountain in that grey light, but actually being able to hunt it, I think was important. And that's where we put ourselves by getting up at 4 every morning and, traveling an hour and a half in the dark to get to the highest ridge, and then often just sit there in the freezing cold for half an hour, listening to bugles if they were firing, otherwise sort of starting to scan around, look at all those, silhouettes on the ridges, and then work into the gullies as the sort of light started filtering through. And this is way before the sun even came up. And then obviously over there in the US, you've got to be considerate of shooting light and stuff. But with the bows, to be honest, by the time you even got close to anything or started a stalk, like, it was well and truly legal hunting light. But being able to get up there early and then actually start hunting was just such a, like, it meant that we weren't really letting elk get back to their bedding areas and then trying to hunt them, a step behind. We were able to go, oh, okay, there's elk. They're still feeding. They're still mucking around. Where do we think they're going to go to? Like, where's the closest bedding area or the best bedding area? And sort of start intercepting them and putting stalks in. And I think that just, afforded us a lot more hunting opportunities where if we were, as James said, like a minute, 5 minutes later, or still slogging up the hill, haven't quite set up the spotting scope or quite got the binos ready or put our layers on and that type of stuff, there's every chance we might have missed that opportunity and kind of been like, oh, it's a slow day today, and waiting till the evening when it sort of fires again. And as James said, the same thing, just being able to stay on that mountain. And I think it was probably because it was so species and target rich and stuff, is we were sort of forced to just sit there. And a lot of the time, even if we couldn't close in on a bull, like we were 100 meters away from them, and they were bugling and stuff, we'd just wait till dark and then slip out well after dark so we weren't scaring anything. But I think we did that really well. Like, there was a certain, I guess, discipline not to just be like, okay, we're not going to be able to shoot this bull, bugger it, and sort of maybe even risk, scaring them for the next couple of days. We, and this sort of probably feeds into the next point a little bit, but we really played it safe in the sense of just trying not to unnecessarily spook animals. And I guess, you can talk to this now, James, but I think not pressuring bedding areas and not pressuring, the cows probably essentially was the main one there. And by not pressuring the cows, it meant that we had bulls coming in consistently.
Yeah, I think because we were obviously trying to go for that next caliber of bull, like, it just made sense, and it was a smart decision to not really get in there unless you could identify that, the bull you wanted to chase was with that herd. And it just sort of meant that we had herds that were, sticking around in locations, reasonable distance to camp, where we easily could have, like, pushed them out of that drainage and or, pushed them into worse spots and stuff like that. And I think it just gave us, more opportunities. And I think you can translate that back to Australia, or any form of hunting where it's like, if you don't pressure the bedding areas, you don't pressure the feeding areas, especially if you're looking for that next caliber, like more trophy hunting style, and you don't pressure the females, the does or the hinds or the sows or whatever, leave those little nurseries in those safe spots and can just sort of observe them without actually putting pressure on them. Well, they're going to pay dividends, and that's when, like, the big fellas are going to start rolling in, and you're actually going to be able to target that sort of next caliber of males. But yeah, obviously if we were, stomping around the mountains, putting heaps of pressure in these nurseries and bedding areas and stuff, and putting pressure on the females, well, it leaves you with very little opportunities pretty quick and just educates animals unnecessarily.
I think the next point for me was just that our ability to learn pretty quickly from mistakes. Like, there were plenty of stalks and things that didn't go well, but I think, to state it as a very brief sort of description of this point, it was that we were generally good students in the sense of we learnt very quickly from previous experiences. And especially this is very important in a foreign zone when, one day the elk might be there, you have a stalk, stuff it up, that those elk might only be there for one more day before they move 5 miles to the next place and potentially on a different private or a different block that you can't hunt. And this kind of comes around like where some of the early stalks on like bulls, or watching where the cows sort of come up through, rutted a little bit with young bulls, went through and filtered through particular gully head, through a creek, up into a bit of a basin, and then over that ridge where they ultimately went embedded. I think it kind of contributed to when you actually did shoot your bull, we'd watched these cows and stuff do a very similar thing a few days earlier, and we were able to get in and call to a few bulls, but nothing sort of quite what we wanted, and had some awesome days. But for me, eventually, there was no real doubt as to where these elk were moving on that September 20th day when James eventually becomes successful shooting his bull. And where we'd sort of watched, from the same glassing knob where we've seen him hundreds of times, or not hundreds, but tens of times over the last 20 days, we'd watched this sort of elk mob emerge. They'd come down. A lot of the bulls, I think, because it was going on in the rut and they'd probably been rutting throughout the night, were actually dropping off the ridge from where the cows were. And the cows were doing the same thing, that they were kind of, again, unworried, undisturbed. They were doing the same thing, just trying to go from feeding to bedding area with their calves. Whereas because it was a little bit warmer this morning, the bulls were dropping off, coming down to the creek. James, as we said in the previous podcast, had an opportunity where he drew back at about 30, 40 meters on a nice 6x7, never got a shot. We sort of tailed him up. And again, we followed him, even though there was a heap of bugling going on over the ridge, sort of to our right, where we couldn't see them. We just knew that mob was going to eventually head up to this gully basin and where we were headed. So we just followed and tailed this bull. And he sort of obviously knew the same thing. And I think just by learning, over previous days and watching exactly where these cows went to and all this type of stuff, and it probably goes back to that not spooking animals, we were able to then get in and close in on the mob, and James ultimately takes his bull from a little bit over 40 yards. And just being able to adapt in that foreign environment is particularly important. And that's where I think even pre-scouting and stuff, and being able to look at an area and then go and put boots to the ground and go, oh, okay, this is what I thought it was, or this is what not what I expected, is sort of a skill that you learn, which can become quite an asset later on. Know where you stand with Onyx, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts, featuring land ownership maps that works offline, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilize Onyx while hunting in the United States on James's elk hunt of a lifetime. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts allowed us to go farther and hunt with confidence.
I think another thing that we've, were able to apply, but definitely learnt just in all of our aspects of hunting was, taking the best way, not the easiest way. I think we've probably learnt that. I mean, for me personally, probably learnt that the most, actually hunting chittle deer, where often you sort of just think, okay, take that straight line. It's only 150 meters away, go here. But often, it actually works out better to cut backwards 100 and go all the way around and drop into that dry creek bed, or use that bit of a dip, or, anticipate where they're going or bedding and so on and so forth. And so rarely nowadays, I actually find that the straight line in front is, the best line or the best way to go in. And I think that gets exacerbated up in the mountains where, often it's oh, I can see straight across, at this elk or whatever it is, this red deer, and just drop straight down the gully and then come up. It's actually it might be better off actually hiking up, going all the way around and then dropping in above them, or and I think we did that really well, where often we had ourselves doing these massive, ridiculous big loops, running up around mountains and so on and so forth, to try and get in front of animals, or try and put ourselves in the best position possible, obviously at the detriment of having to go twice as long way, or the steeper way or whatever. And it probably comes back to a bit of the fitness aspect, where it's we were just prioritizing giving ourselves the best opportunities on these stalks, rather than just going often straight ahead, where people just do it all the time. And I think honestly, as a hunter, going to that next level of experience probably was just making that connection and thinking no, don't go straight. Is there a better option? And I think, I think we did that really, really well while we were over there, and it meant that we were able to get in and have some cooler experiences than we otherwise would have had if we, just charged on in straight, and probably would have got seen or smelt or whatever, not risking it essentially, and giving ourselves the best odds of being successful.
And for me, this point, taking the best, often, the harder, longer approach and not the easier, quicker approach, was probably more relevant for that before first light and after dark sort of scenarios too, where, again, just coming back to pressure, and hunting public land and all these animals over in the USA, a lot of it comes back to pressure. And those deer and elk and, whatever it is, will often be doing the same things if left undisturbed. And the pressure is one of the things that changes their habits quickest, I guess. And as James was saying there, like the best line isn't always A to B, but it might be going from A back to Z, and going the opposite way. And this was certainly the case, I think, with, there were that many times where we would end up on the other side of a mob of elk, and then camp was sort of, out past them. And instead of just trudging through them or the easiest route down along the creek or the ridge or whatever, we'd do a big couple of mile loop to navigate and just not bump the animals that we were sort of intending to hunt. And the same goes for in the morning. And we've spoken about this on previous podcasts with, just knowing the route in and out. And this is stuff that we looked on topo maps, before we even, got to the States. And once we went, okay, that's a good ridge to obviously try and glass all these areas for. How can we sort of get in there? And it's often like, it might add on half an hour of, walking to the trip. Instead of doing a 3 mile walk into the vantage point, it might be 4.5. And that adds, half an hour in the dark. But that just means we get up at 3:30 that morning instead of 4. And for us, it's not, we're going to get to the vantage point a little bit later, or we're not going to, skim through and try and bump elk and then go, once we get to the vantage point, be like, oh shit, where are all the animals? Like, we've hopefully taken the best, again, often it is harder than the easier route. But it puts you in such a good place to then obviously have a good hunt or be successful in these stalks.
I think another thing now that we've got pretty well dialed, I think it's just from hunting so much, is what we eat whilst we're on the hunt. And I think it was one of the other key aspects. Like, obviously we talked about being fit and training beforehand, but I think like what you feed your body is critically important in these hunts. And we very much steered clear of anything like other than the traditional chocolate thick shakes that you saw us smashing at Macca's whenever we went into town. We pretty much didn't have any chocolate or lollies or anything like that. Like what we mainly stuck with was like we prioritize our proteins and our fats with like a little bit of carbs. The dehydrated meals were really good nutrition wise, pretty balanced. But yeah, even in camp, like we pretty much ate like our 2 meals that we ate for the whole trip. And this is where we talk about like Ayden and I are pretty simple folk, and we just treat our bodies like a car, and like we just need to fuel it with the best thing possible. And so our 2 meals for pretty much the whole trip was mince wraps and spaghetti bolognese. Like we ate that for 20 days straight, alternatively like lunch and dinners if we were in camp. And I say that because we think it's a pretty balanced meal in terms of like with the wrap, you put salads in it. With the bolognese, you put, onion, carrot, garlic, celery, like, so it's got a bit of veg in there, but also mushrooms in the bolognese. But you also, the big thing is, well, we were buying like on purpose the 70% mince, so quite fatty mince that they had over there. And that was just trying to get that fat levels up. Like it was pretty much oozing out. Like you didn't really want to touch it when it was cold. But trying to get that increased fat, increased calories in there. Obviously extremely protein dense as well with all that mince. And to be honest, like obviously the wrap, it hasn't got a lot of carb in it. And the bolognese itself, we probably had stronger on the sauce side of things and the pasta side of things. But we did these on purpose because like all of our other snacks, like, the muesli bars, and like, Cliff bars, that type of thing. Any dried fruits or eating, like they were all trail mixes. They were all pretty high on the carb side, like the nuts and stuff like that. They were obviously like pretty high in fats, but other than jerky, and like jerky's high in protein, but other than the nuts high in fat, like everything else was pretty high in that sort of carb, quick energy. So just trying to make sure we're getting enough protein, especially to like rebuild muscles, obviously putting a lot of strain on them, and fats just for that like sort of longer release energy rather than just that quick sort of injection of carbs. And I honestly think that was a huge success and part of us being able to just continuously back it up. And like what we said previously, like we had very, very little muscle soreness. This trip, just taking that one step further, we've already got protein there as well, which, not doing it necessarily for the calories, like it's just a general protein, but just making sure we're getting enough of all the types of amino acids to make sure that we're essentially preventing that muscle soreness and can just go harder for longer. And I just think it's super important, like what you're putting in the tank obviously determines, your output. And I mean, for us, like we obviously take it pretty seriously, a little bit addicted, some may say, but I see, and not like ragging on anyone because it just depends on like what your style of hunting is and what your thing. But I see these guys eating pretty average food, maybe like microwave meal food or something like that in hunting camp, pretty low nutritious stuff, a lot of lollies, a lot of chocolate, and then smashing 4 rums a night as well. And I just think, like, how much of a better hunter, or how much better would you feel that next morning? Like, how much less brain fog are you going to have when you've got that croaking fallow buck or that red deer? And how much of a better hunter would you be if you weren't half hungover and actually fueling your body properly? And I know for us, we had absolutely none of that. Like, it was just every morning you roll out of bed, you're straight on boots, bacon and eggs for brekkie. Straight out on the mountain. And like, there's not a lot of guys that probably want to eat in the morning. Like, this is something that we've adapted, and I'd say, not perfected, but getting pretty close over time. Everything's constantly getting tweaked and everything like that. But this is just what we've found that works really well for us. And I definitely think it was one of the key attributes of us being able to sort of go as hard as we did for as long as we did, and obviously ultimately find the success that we did.
This last point that I want to touch on is a bit of a funny one, because I think this is something that could equally go in things that we did well or things that, we have to obviously work on. And that's, if you say it broadly like that, it'd be calling. But to narrow it down and say, one aspect of it that I think we did really well was probably the location bugles. Again, not the best callers, but fortunately with the location bugling, you probably don't have to be, and that's what we realised pretty quickly. And these location bugles were absolutely essential for us for just unveiling where sort of, any potential extra bulls were throughout the trip. And essentially it just added opportunities for us to go and then therefore like stalk bulls that we probably would have walked past if we had have kept going without ripping a bugle. And I know that James, he had that, as you would have seen in the video footage, he had that bugle tube sort of sitting there around his shoulder, or very accessible in the pack. And every time we went around a bit of a bend in a ridge, and especially during the middle of the day, sort of, early afternoon, as things, had cooled down and we didn't really have a bit of a lead, we'd often get up on that, as we said, a bit of a bend, just where, our noise would go down into the valley below us, and we'd rip that bugle and sort of wait a few minutes. And often we'd get a reply and just something to let us know, like, all right, there's an elk down there. And depending on like the topography, if we could look down into that, where we were then planning on going, it would just give us the opportunity to like either glass that spot, sit here and say, okay, we're going to sit here and wait. Like, we saw a good bull go into there this morning. But it wasn't necessarily like, okay, cool, we're now going to get into an agitated, aggressive, bugle off, and we're going to try and call this bull in. But it was very much just a heat check, if you will, for, okay, there's a bull down here, we'll keep going. Okay, there's a bull down there, there's 3 bulls down here. If there's 3 bulls down there, they're probably a couple of satellites. The herd bull might be quiet, but he might be there, upwind of them, because the satellite bulls are obviously going to try and bed downwind so they can keep in touch and smell those cows. There's probably a mob in this vicinity of cows. It might be a good place to sit and wait for the afternoon as they start bugling sort of more authentically by themselves, and things start firing up and they start rutting. And I think, again, as we'll probably move on in a second here to things that we need to work on, and calling would be probably one of those things, is just refining sort of exactly how you do it. But it's a weird thing where, we can be critical of how we call, but I think for these animals, because they're in such a rut frenzy, it doesn't necessarily matter. As long as you sort of fit into that spectrum somewhere as a bit of a bugling bull, you're going to get replies. And it's the same for red deer. And like, we translated it to reds this year during the rut and had a lot of success with, location roars, or even taking it that next step forward and having location hind calls. And this was definitely something that I think we might not have done perfect, but it was definitely something that we did well.
We all know when it comes to great tasting coffee in the outdoors, look no further than Dog and Gun Coffee. But the same great tasting coffee can also be enjoyed in their whole bean variety in the comfort of your own home. Rounded out with their incredible hog chocky, Dog and Gun has something for everyone. Use code TWIN10 at checkout for $10 off your first order. Discover your brew choice today.
Switching it up now and looking at things we may have been able to do a bit better, and obviously learning from our mistakes. For me personally, I think, the biggest one would be assessing bulls in the flesh, and obviously being very green, having very little experience, and thinking, like, I've never even put a tape on a bull elk, let alone many animals, to be honest. And trying to assess trophy potential quickly in the field, and then extrapolate that to a score, and obviously having a score in mind. I think it, ultimately probably put a bit of a sour taste on the whole trip. Just sort of more that trophy, and that's where I am very excited for this trip where it's sort of a no holds bar, like everything's open and obviously within legal, like it's got to have horns and so on and so forth. But yeah, pretty excited to be out there and just be like, yep, that's a good buck, or that's a good antelope, that's a good elk. Let's go and stalk it. But yeah, I think for me, it was probably a pretty dumb decision to have that score in mind. And I'd almost advise anyone the opposite of what I did and the people that I spoke to. Like if you go on a trip, and we see this with guiding all the time. Like if you go on a trip, like have the expectations of the adventure of the trip. But if you have an expectation of the trophy in mind, like I wouldn't get so caught up on it. Like I've never seen someone, like my bull was obviously less, or I mean, it might not be obvious to people, but it was less than 350 in what I was going for. And like in some ways it made it a better trip because we got to hunt so long for him, like, you know. But in other ways, like, I mean, I did also have an antelope and deer tag at the time that would have also been pretty cool to hunt as well, you know, and that wouldn't have taken away from the trip if I got to hunt them too. And so there's a lot of aspects in it, but like, going back, I'd advise people not to, really have that like super trophy hunter sort of attitude in mind and be like, oh, it must be a 30 Douglas Point boar or a 30-inch chitter or a 36-inch rooster or a massive 6x6 red or whatever. Like, I think just going and having that hunt and that adventure, and to be honest, like if you see something that you like, go and hunt it. And obviously that then like, this for me was probably the first time I'd ever actually put a score next to an animal wanting to shoot. Like for me before that, it'd always been like, oh, that's a good looking buffalo. That's a nice boar. That's a nice fallow deer. Like I'm going to go and stalk it. And I think, for me, putting that score next to it, it did definitely take away from the hunt. And I'd probably advise anyone in the future, like, I mean, you could be different to me, but I would say just go there for the experience and the hunt. And if it does, look good, because I've never really seen anyone that once they've got an animal on the ground, they've like regretted shooting it. And that definitely was the case for me over there, and has been the case for me like hunting here in Australia and everywhere else. Like, so I'd say, enjoy the adventure, enjoy the hunt, and just if you like the look of the animal, go for it. Don't get so much wrapped up in, how long it is or what it scores and how much it weighs, whatever it is. Just do it for the hunt.
Yeah, I think you use the word nice there for, nice fallow buck, nice red stag, nice, bull elk, for example. I think the word for me is just mature. And there were so many bulls that we saw that were like a really nice mature bull that we kind of, and this is probably where assessing the bulls for trophy potential like very quickly was something that we just weren't, adept at doing, because by the time we were sort of in awe of these animals. Like I remember sitting there behind the camera going, holy shit, there's a big bull elk there. And sometimes this was at 100 meters, 120 meters. And by the time we we're sitting there going, oh, is he good enough to shoot? Like this is on day 5 of a potentially 20-day trip. We've got 15 days to try and find a better bull. And we just kept coming to that decision of like, oh, I think we'll probably find a better one, but like, oh, what if? And by the time we'd had this little dialogue between ourselves, that's that opportunity for a stalk, and not like being able to follow him up to his bedding area. Like that was always the case. Like just the way we hunt, we can kind of get back on an animal, but we'd lost that for 4 or 5 seconds sometimes. And hopefully the real keen hunters here will understand like 4 or 5 seconds when you first identify an animal and have it moving in a certain zone could allow like a quick little hind call if that bull has left his herd and like he's in a really good spot. And then after 4 or 5 seconds, we've talked about it. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe we'll try and stalk him now. But he's already made his mind up that he's no longer going from, looking around the edge of the cows. He's now going to his bed. And that's probably where if we were able to like just assess the bulls probably more quickly and probably more justly, in the sense of, again, we were saying, oh yeah, we're going to try and shoot a 350, 360 bull or whatever, but we didn't really even know or appreciate what that was. Like I remember showing some of the people that were over there, like hunting on their properties, for example, or coming across and showing them some of the bulls that we'd seen. There were other hunters in the area as well that we were showing them what we were seeing and stuff, because again, there were just that many animals that we weren't really fussed with necessarily competition being in like a limited entry unit. And I remember them being like, oh, dude, that's an awesome bull. Like, how close did you get? And we're like, oh, we just let him walk by at like 100. And they're like, what do you mean? And like, didn't even stalk it. And it's like, should we have? Like, and some of these bulls, it's similar to chittle deer, like in the guiding that I do with the spotted safaris, like people come with, a mindset of they hear the number 30 inches and they go, if I don't shoot a 30 inch, I'm going to be disappointed. And that's where a lot of my clients, I have real discussions with them earlier and just say, look, we certainly do shoot 30-inch stags every year. Like this year I had a father-son come out, and again, we'd had the discussion. They'd actually been with me previously. Well, the son had, and he'd shot, I think, a 29-incher, and his mate on the trip had shot a 31-incher. So he knew that they were out there. But again, we had the discussion before the trip and basically just said, we're going to have a really good hunt either way, whether it's a 26-incher that's mature, 27, 28, 29, whatever. If it does go over 30, that's going to be great. But we're just going to get up early, do all the things required to put ourselves in the position to hopefully encounter a 30-incher, because there are some trips you simply don't. And then as we found out, this father-son duo, pretty much straight away, hot off the trip, after getting there, ended up shooting a nice 31 and a really wide 30-incher. So they took 2 30-inches out in the same little trip, which is super great hunt, but they were rewarded for their effort and obviously being very patient and passing up a lot of younger stags and stuff along the way. But that's a deer species that I've spent 10 to 15 years hunting now, and know a 5-inch inner compared to a 4-inch inner, a 10-inch brow tine compared to a 12-inch, a 30-incher compared to a 29 3/4. Like, I've spent enough time on these deer where it's and measured enough and done that sort of, I don't want to say nastier side of hunting, because for me, I measure a lot of deer for clients, but I personally don't really care. Like I've shot over 30s, I've shot under 30s, and to me, they're all very similar in the sense of the quality of the hunt. And that's probably where, we were trying to, maybe with the word limited entry and, this trophy sort of unit, we probably had connotations in our head as to, the bull has to be a certain this, that. And we probably, being truthful, didn't really even know what that meant a little bit. Like it's a hard thing. Even walking away now, if I saw a 350 bull walk out in front of me, I'd be like, yeah, shit, he's a monster. But if a 320 bull walked out, shit, he's a monster. For me, the actual difference, and especially when you've got a main beam, 6 points either side, like 1 or 2 inches on that could be the difference in 20 points, if that makes sense. So a 320 to a 340 could be like an inch or so on every point, which is bugger all. And especially on a really thick, heavy bull, he might have awesome length, but not look as good as, a younger, thinner, finer sort of bull with long points or tines. So it's just such a, I think give each bull their opportunity and assess, the trophy potential maybe a little bit quicker next time. But as James said, fortunately we're in a general unit this time, and to be honest, it's going to be more just about that hunt and putting in effort, and if the opportunity presents, then hopefully coming across more of just a mature animal is going to be the goal, I guess, rather than really assessing that trophy potential or the antler quality and stuff like that, which is I'm really excited for, because it probably resonates more with a lot more of the hunts that we do, where we're just out there for the adventure and the lifestyle side of it. And, whether it's the wildlife or the scenery that we come across, that's sort of why we're out there doing it. And the animal at the end of the day, whether we get one or not, is going to be an added bonus.
I think the next thing that we learnt, especially on this trip, was overpacking. I know with carrying camera gear, it does always complicate things, and so having an extra big lens and a tripod, another lens, and all the batteries, and lighting sometimes, and mics and lab mics, and all the rest of it. There's 10 to 15 kilos there, plus then your food for the day, water, head torches, first aid kits, all that type of stuff. And I think just we're definitely have gotten better. Even packing this trip for the US, I've pretty much taken I think 1 pair of pants, a jumper, in plain clothes, 3 t-shirts, pair of shorts, 1 pair of pants and a jumper, for the whole month I'm over there. And it's pretty much just because I'm okay, we're just going to be hunting the whole time. If I need to go and socialize with anyone, I'm going to wear a hunting jumper. It's even, that type of thing, and just really simplifying and working out, I've carried this bloody item for 5 trips now, and it's never come out of my backpack. And for something like a tourniquet, that's great. That's really good. I'm happy that hasn't come out. But for something I can't even imagine. But just little items and stuff where you've always had them and just never used them. They've bummed around in the bottom of your bag. It's been nice to offload a few things and really simplify, probably more so even with the camera side of things, like even with the lighting stuff and extra tripods and that type of thing, like extra lenses and stuff, and really just narrow it down to be, okay, I need this lens and this lens. I don't need 4 lenses. And like, I can't, yes, you always want to have enough batteries for a day, but I can't physically go through 12 batteries in a day. So 4 are probably going to be fine. Well, like those 8 extra batteries, like it sounds silly, but there's probably like 500 grams just in those batteries. And even, just having like backups of backups. And like, I mean, it's just got to a point now that we've sort of know what we need. And I think on that trip, obviously, because we wanted to be perfect and have everything perfect, we carried a lot of gear that we didn't need. And obviously that puts extra stress on you physically. But we've been able to really refine that down.
A point that I wanted to sort of speak to, and we're actually going to do a podcast on this next week, is just more glassing and probably being more efficient with the spotting scope. We took one over because we wanted to obviously be trying to assess the trophy potential of animals from a long way away and keeping, animals undisturbed. And again, the difference between the binoculars and seeing an elk at 5 miles and going, oh, okay, yeah, it's a bull. It's bigger than everything else. It's got a frame that I can see. And then being able to chuck the spotting scope on it from that same distance and go, oh, okay, it's a 6x6 with a little kicker on that side and it's broken on that side or it's not or whatever, it may be, was just massive for saving the legs, I guess. And also, but where I do want, so it proved itself as like an amazing bit of kit, something that we're obviously going to take across this time in the US and something that we've actually implemented on a lot of our hunts. Like I know I use the spotting scope for chital deer and assessing trophy potential from, kilometre away, 2 kilometres away. As well as, James and I used it for red deer and trying to find stags and stuff during the rut and the raw. But what I think we could get better at is just probably actually pulling it out and looking even deeper into some of these little nooks and crannies during the middle of the day, but also just the speed at which like that target acquisition. And I guess guys that use rifles probably can understand what I'm talking about here, where, I see it with a lot of the rifle hunters that I'm guiding where you'll be like, okay, there's a deer in front of us here at 100, try and find him in the scope. And for some guys, it's like that rifle comes to the shoulder. They've been watching the deer with their naked eye. They know where it is. The scope hits their eye and their crosshairs are basically on the deer simultaneously within a second. And then there are other guys that just, you can tell, aren't that familiar with their rifle or haven't maybe done it as much. And it's a bit of a more fumbly process. They sort of, go off on a 20-degree angle and they're kind of looking over there and you're like, no, I think you're looking the wrong way. Come back to the left. And they're taking their head away from the scope, putting it back, doing all this stuff. And then about a minute later, they're like, oh, yep, got the deer. And there's just such a difference there between, again, being efficient and potentially, seeing or missing a bull for trophy potential. And not that we, I can't recall an exact moment, but I just remember thinking like, this bit of gear is so valuable if used correctly. Like I really want to learn more from this. And again, this, taking notes and things to work on was from 2 years ago now. And I'm happy to say that we're a lot more efficient with it. But it's probably a wider point of just, if you're taking gear over to some of these places, just be really efficient, know how to use it, know, the assembly of things. It's the same as with a rifle, being able to reload the bolt quickly and do all these types of things. Like you want to be practicing in the field, same as an arrow. Have a shot at 30 and then practice putting an arrow on really quickly if it affords. Just all these little things, being able to range, quickly and efficiently. Does your rangefinder come out of your rangefinder pouch and hit everything and make a lot of noise? Does your binos, when you bring them out of the pouch, make a lot of noise? Or is the magnetic sort of, clip going to hit on things? Like our Ebola stock bino harnesses that we have, they've got a little flap, but it doesn't have a magnetic pouch. And it's been awesome for us because it makes everything so much more quiet and sort of seamless to fit and go in back nice and snug in there. And especially on the last stage of the stalk, it's really valuable because you can get into 30 meters of a deer, check its bedding or its anatomy and things like that, put your binos back and it's not making a noise. So that's, been a really important thing, is just getting really familiar with bits and bobs of the gear. So the last thing that I wanted to work on, and again, this is probably just not being familiar enough with the countryside and sort of the area that we're hunting, but the best way I'd describe it is if you were in, say, Victoria and New South Wales and you're sitting up on a ridge and you're looking at what you think is pretty open sort of country, pretty open farm fringe land. You might have a few sheep, a few cows on the paddock or the pasture, and then a few little clumps of what you think are little clumps of blackberries. for us, this translated to what I'd say were these big aspen sort of thickets where we were glassing what looked like really open ridges and basins and stuff like that, thinking that, we were going to see a big blonde elk, because that's what they are. They're these big light coloured animals the size of a horse with massive antlers, and even from a few kilometres away, they stand out. Like truly, when a big elk walks out of a pine thicket or something like that, you're like, oh, there it is. Like it's this white beacon on the hill. But there is also, because there is a lot of brown, that option for them. Once they go into some shadows and stuff and stop moving, they just disappear. And the point that I wanted to raise here is just assessing the land before you sort of, I guess, like spend a lot of time glassing it from afar. Like sometimes you do have to put that foot traffic on and actually walk a hillside to know what you're like dealing with. And this became relevant for me, at least, with looking at these open faces going, oh, okay, there's nothing here, because we would be able to see an elk. And then an elk would come and stand out of like a patch of tiny little aspens that are like 10 meters wide in diameter. But it wasn't until we actually walked that hillside where the elk was trying to look for this bull that you go, holy shit, those aspens are like 10 meters tall and super dense and thick. Like you wouldn't even see, a fluoro orange person in there. It's that thick. And it didn't look that way from the other bank, like hillside, I guess, a kilometre away. Like it looked like just a few trees clumped together, creating a bit of a clump of vegetation. And so hopefully you guys are understanding what I'm trying to say there. And it's the same for a blackberry bush. Like the amount of times I've gone, oh, okay, yeah, we should be able to see a fallow if it walks through this gully. And then you actually go and walk that gully, and the blackberry bushes are 10 foot tall. They're not 3 foot tall, or they're not sparsely spread out like you thought they were. It's just the fact that from up on top, it looks like they're all sort of not communicating, and like an animal would have to walk through clusters. Whereas once you're down there in the thick of it, you're like, a red deer could walk through here and you wouldn't even see him because his antlers are going to be covered, and you can walk that little game trail in the shadows here, and you see him just disappear into the blackberry thicket. So that would probably be the last little consideration that I think, I learnt a lot from, is the size of an animal the size of an elk can literally just disappear into the tiniest little patch of timber. And then, you'd often look into these big thickets of pines and go, oh, I wonder if there's something in there. And then 50 cows would emerge. And that was a really cool, really eye-opening experience, and partly something that, really struck with me from that USA trip. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters with the mission to give Australian hunters the resource they deserve. Through community events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. It's a community. Check out their incredible mega store in Brisbane today, or head to their website to shop all things hunting and outdoors.
Well, shifting gears now and jumping into the second half of the podcast, we just want to talk about mental toughness and, taking that next step on the mountain, being able to push further. And for me, really, there is two aspects that we've sort of split that up into, and that is the physical and the mental. So I'm going to start with the mental, just purely because I think that is the one for most people that really does sort of expire first and run out of juice first. And I think for me, it's not only about, like working together and like having this check on your body. It's about like having that internal fight with yourself, and being able to sort of, almost have a discussion with yourself and have two voices in your head going at the time, where one's saying, we should stop and go back to camp early. You don't have, enough charge on your head torch, and, don't keep pushing further away from camp. And the other one's like, no, well, there's a boar halfway up this hill, so we're going to go and get it. And I think, like, obviously never putting yourself in on purpose, like harm's way. It's important to have that voice in there. And like, the more I find that I sort of, to put it into a muscle, like I find the more that I push and talk louder with the voice that says, no, you can do this, keep going. Like, the easier it becomes, and the less that inner voice that wants to give up really does come out and be heard. And I mean, it could be even just simple things in terms of like snacking on chocolate, you know what I mean? Like the more you go, okay, no. And like once, it's one of these things that we talk about, like 1 second mistakes, where it's like, you just have to give in, for a second, and that leads into, and it could be like you stopping, it could be you, like not putting something in your pack that you really needed, like wet weather gear, because you're like, oh, it's too heavy, or it could be you cutting down on food. It could be you not wanting to walk the longest way around the ridge. But it's like these split-second decisions that ultimately lead into massive repercussions. But really, it's a second that we're talking about of sort of weakness. And I think for me, the big thing is just always trying to live to that higher standard, whether it be physically, with food and calories, those sort of things, training, and just thinking like, what should I actually be doing here? And I know for me, like I said, like the more I've done that personally, the easier it's become to live to that standard. And I'm not saying that we don't have moments that we're not perfect and, do things that we shouldn't, like have that chocolate bar or, go the easy way, or, like instead of walking up and around over the hill, like you skyline yourself a little bit. Like I'm not saying that we're, gods, we're perfect people, but it's just like as much as possible trying to do it the right way and really trying to listen to that inner voice of being like, okay, the right thing to be doing here. And just doing that rather than taking the easy option.
Yeah, I would like to add to that a little bit and just say, I think that inner voice that you hear is what I'd call probably your feelings a little bit. And like you might have 20 to 30 feelings in an hour, let alone throughout the day. And it might be, I feel tired, I feel unmotivated, I feel sad, I feel lonely. You could be on the hill going, I feel absolutely bloody wrecked. I feel really optimistic for the afternoon. I feel so excited because I've just heard a bull elk bugle. Like there's literally 100, the feelings and emotions, I guess. And what I'd try and urge you to do is then relate that back to a bit more of a choice and actually choose to then do with it, like with that feeling, what aligns most with what you're trying to achieve out of it. And it's so hard because a lot of the time, motivation is a big thing. And I hear people say, oh, you're so motivated to do things. And it's like, no, I'd actually rather be really disciplined and, consistent in a way. And I know that if I wake up at 4 a.m., regardless of if I want to, because if you ask me on the morning when I wake up at 4 o'clock, at 4:01, if you say, are you happy to be out of bed? I'm going to be like, no, I feel shit. I feel tired. My body feels sore. I feel cold. I want to feel warm. I want to, be sleeping. But I know that if I snooze that alarm and I sleep in, then later on I'm going to feel like an absolute piece of shit. So then my brain just goes, okay, this is a necessary, I guess, evil, if you want to put it that far and that extreme. But to achieve what I want to achieve, I have, with, analysis and rationale, all these things, said to myself that I need to be up at 4, have smashed my food and got warm and got dressed and put my boots on by 4:20, 4:30, and then walk up the mountain for the next hour and a half to get to a spot where I can sit in the dark for half an hour and listen for bugles. Whether I necessarily want to, the thing at the end of the day is that we want to shoot a bull elk. And in order to do that, that decision that we've just made, that choice we've just made to get up at 4, whether we want to do it in the moment, is something that we acknowledge is going to get us closer to our ultimate goal. And again, for me, that's where like a lot of it, I try and remove the emotion when we're on the trip and the hunts and things like this. And because for me, the hardest decision is often like, not the hardest decision, like ahead of a trip, I'm always like, yeah, but let's do the trip. But then as it leads up to the trip, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this trip, I'm going to give it absolutely everything, like a little bit to the detriment of my other life, like my family, my partner, my dogs, my parents, my friends, all this type of stuff. Like I stopped drinking in the weeks beforehand. I don't drink much in general, but my training amplifies, my packing amplifies, my Onyx, scouting amplifies, my phone calls to logistics and people that I need to amplifies, my planning and stuff with James amplifies. So there's not that much time for distractions. And I think it's very much the same and continues throughout the trip. And by doing that, it's not going to determine that your goals are met, but it just means that it removes these distractions. And to be honest, a lot of these feelings on the trip are, and the sooner you sort of realize that and you can translate that directly to life as well. Like if you say, my goal is to lose 10 kilos, and then every day you go, oh, I feel like eating that little bit of chocolate. And if you haven't actually budgeted and planned for those added calories, then it's literally going against what, you're trying to achieve. Whereas if you just go, no, I'm going to ignore that 1 minute of feeling like I want chocolate. And if in 5 minutes later, I still desperately want that chocolate, then maybe we'll come to a different decision. But like often by just saying, okay, I acknowledge that feeling, I'm not going to act on it, and in 5 minutes I'll readdress, you've already moved on to the next thing. And it's the same thing as getting out of bed. It's like 4 a.m., that alarm goes off. Don't even sit there and allow yourself. And that's, to be honest, where I'm lucky. Like, I hunt with my best mate and someone that holds me very accountable. And even if I do have that little bit of weakness and that little bit of, maybe not everything's lined with the cause, it's like I've got someone else saying, get the F out of bed, mate. Like, we've got shit to do. And whether it's me the next day doing the exact same thing when he's saying, oh, let's just have a break on the hill for 1 second. And I'm like, no, these elk are going to cut our wind. We need to fucking move now. It's all these little bits. And that's where, like, the human brain is so magical in the sense of, like, we have a choice. We get these feelings, we get these urges. And at the end of the day, the more you just, like, allow your brain to go through things and, like, adapt and mold, and it is literally a muscle, like, get bigger and stronger and work and create a little bit of armor and stuff, you kind of get a bit calloused, would be the word. And it's just like your brain goes, oh, I've been there before, I've done this, I know what's required. And it's just deals with new experiences, new feelings and things so much faster and better. And then it actually gives you the opportunity to, like, make, the right or proper decisions, which is really cool.
And I think another thing that Ayden said that was, obviously speaks home was, if your mental toughness isn't quite that strong, and I think, you let your emotions in maybe a little bit too much, like what Ayden was saying, like, one thing that can really bolster your mental toughness is having that mate and someone keeping you accountable, because in your, like, it's a 50-50 really in a moment of weakness, whether you do what your brain's saying you shouldn't do, like eat the chocolate bar, or if you don't, right? But really, if you've got someone there that's keeping you accountable, then, like, or going to the gym or anything like that, then you're almost not only, like, you're potentially looking at, like, letting themselves down, which a lot of people would rather let themselves down than let someone else down. But also, even in terms of mental toughness of taking that next step, like, they can pull you up when you're down. And it's very rare that, well, it's less likely, chance-wise, that you're both going to be feeling, in that exact moment, like you should give up and not take that next step. Or, you go, oh, let's cut down here. And you go, no, let's go the right way and let's go up the hill and, do this stalk properly. Or let's, like, it's unlikely that you both going to want and smash those extra double choc thick shakes, which we're going to do a little bit. But, what I'm trying to say is, like, having someone there to keep you, whether it be at the gym or whatever, keep you accountable is definitely a way that you can bolster your mental toughness. And in a lot of ways, I'm just going to tell a quick story before we sort of wrap this section up, where in my first elk specifically, like, I remember one of the few times in my whole life where I considered that I pretty much broke mentally. Like, I remember, and honestly, like, crying on the mountain halfway up this ridge because so it was just after I'd shot my elk, my first elk. It was, I'd been cutting calories all day. Like, from breakfast, I'd eaten like half a scrambled eggs meal, like a D-high meal. I had one muesli bar as a snack all day, pretty much for dinner, and like the second half of my eggs meal for lunch. So I'd pretty much, like, instead of eating, just say 2,500, 3,000 calories, I had probably less than 1,000. I'd already done maybe 6 or 7 kilometers getting to this spot where I shot this elk. And obviously you shoot the elk, like, and had barely any food on me, barely any water. Like, I would have killed for like a rise or something at that time. And by the time I shot my elk, by the time I'd butchered it, taken photos, everything like that, and went to pack this thing out, it was like 11 o'clock at night. And I had close to, I think it was like 2,500 vertical feet of elevation, so sort of 200 floors. And I remember I had obviously all my hunting gear, which was probably weighed 15 kilos in itself. And I remember I tried to take out the 2 back straps and the 2 front legs of meat of this animal. And obviously in like a huge caloric deficit, carrying out probably over 40 kilos of crap, meat and equipment included. And I remember trying to walk up this hill, and it was like the first, maybe 200-300 meters was purely just all rock and boulder and stuff. And I remember it starting to rain and just getting like super slippery, and I'm like, my legs are weak, I'm buckling, and I remember just being halfway up this hill, like pretty much falling off this hill and like doing a big fall. I was so scared I'd broken the frame of my backpack. But I remember just sitting there, like rolling myself up, and pretty much just started like crying, like, what the fuck am I doing here? And I ended up making the sensible decision, took off my pack, ended up taking out one of the front legs and hanging in a tree. And then hiking out. I mean, it took me, I didn't get home back to camp until like 4:30 in the morning. So it was like 5.5 hours to get up this hill where camp was. And then I remember being like 150 meters from camp and literally just taking my backpack off and dumping it on a log, like on a fallen down thing, stripping down to my jocks because I was like half covered in blood and in pretty high grizzly bear country, and just like walking back to camp and like jumping into bed. And that was like one time that, like mentally completely broken down. But the whole point of this story, like I honestly think it would have been, not that I would have or could have necessarily carried that meat out. And that's where obviously the physical side of thing that we'll get into is so important. But like my threshold for that suffering would have been so much easier if, my brother or I had someone else there with me. And so if you're someone that, struggles with this, whether it be, keeping motivated on a diet, keeping motivated going to the gym, keeping motivated to push up further when you go hunting, in anything in life, I think having someone accountable there with you just bolsters that. And I think, you're going to get a lot further. And actually, once you start strengthening that muscle, like what we said, that mental toughness muscle, it does become a lot easier to just, do it yourself. But if you need some help in the start, and I mean, I'm happy to do it. Reach out to me on Instagram and send me a message, and I'm happy to help you out lose some weight, or, give you some tips on getting up the mountain, and tell me the stories. Because I mean, sometimes it's even the fact that you did push through. You say, James, instead of me going the easy way, I went the hard way and actually got that fallow buck, or I got that boar, or I got that, rooster deer, or whatever it is. Like in itself, that's a reward. And then telling someone else about it, and then me getting, keen as for it. And then, and then it just starts building that muscle for yourself. So, I mean, if you haven't got a friend or a mate that's going to support you, or a partner, I'm happy to be that person. Send me a message and we can start this journey together. But mental toughness, the first side's definitely living up in your brain, and the second part is definitely the physical side, which easily enough for us. You can train, but it's also hard to do as well. The Hunting Australia Facebook group is now a club that you can join. Members get access to discount codes from leading businesses. You can acquire your New South Wales R licence membership, and every month they run incredible giveaways with thousands of dollars worth of top tier gear, but also give away guided hunts as well. So if you want to learn from the best, or go in the running to win some incredible gear, or maybe a hunt of a lifetime, or just want to be part of the greater hunting community, make sure to join the Hunting Australia group. Use code TWINELEMENTS to get 10% off your membership.
That's certainly where, for me, I think my mental strengths, whatever they may be, have definitely come from physical attributes, and creating, I guess, a bit of muscle memory physically that then translates to like later enjoyed, and it's probably comes back to like delayed gratification, where it's one of those things where coming back to losing weight or getting fit, there's no one with you at 5 a.m. when an hour before you'd normally get up for work, your alarm rings out and it's cold and everything, all these feelings are saying, nah, stay in bed with your partner, or, stay in bed and have a warm coffee in 20 minutes, and stay in bed and have a nice shower, stay in bed, stay warm, all this other stuff. You're making that decision to get up, whether it's go for a run, go to the gym, go do whatever. You're making this decision that no one really sees except for you, and maybe your partner who's a bit disgruntled that you're getting up at 5 a.m, like an hour before you both normally get up, or whatever it may be. But I think for me, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of this, mental toughness and mindsets and different things that you come about later, for me, started initially when, you're creating this muscle memory early on, and it's through these tiny little decisions and consistency and discipline that, to be honest, like a lot of people now go, oh yeah, you're fit, you're, like a fit young bloke. And it's like, no one's seen, all the sacrifices that go into that. Only you do. And, that's probably one of the most important things, is that at the end of the day, you've got to be doing it for you, because if you're trying to please other people, you'll never reach where you want to reach. Whereas, if you just, and you're not always going to have the best day or the worst day, it's just becoming comfortable with just putting your best effort in for that time, I think is really important. And to be honest, what I want everyone to understand is that if you make your hardest, I guess, embarkment on a journey or whatever it may be. So say you go and hunt in the US and you've never put any weight in your backpack in Australia, you've never done a stair machine, and the first time you're putting 30 kilos on your backpack is when you've got an elk quarter in it's going to literally break you, because not only is it 30 kilos, it's now 30 kilos in 3,000 meters of vertical gain. It's 3,000 meters in sleet and rain. It's 3,000 meters in, calorie deficit, sleep fatigue, no loneliness, all these variables that, hunting loves to just throw in at us. But what you can do through having like a general level of fitness and, all this muscle memory earlier is prior to the hunt, as long as, and to be honest, it's a lot more safe and regulated setting. Like if you go to the gym or start rucking or start training, doing the stair machine, assault bikes, all these different exercises that we're going to get into, you sort of create this level of, holy shit, that was the toughest workout that I've done ever. And then the next session you go, oh, I beat that time, I beat that distance. That's the hardest session I've ever done thus far. And that's where I want to just say that, it all starts out relevant to us. So this could be the biggest hill that I've ever been up, again, thus far. The hardest pack out that I've ever done to this moment, thus far. So there's always that next best thing. And that's where I think not going, oh, this is going to be difficult and shying away from it and going, this is going to be difficult, let me test myself, is a really good opportunity to sort of build not only on that physical fitness and that physical suffering and chosen suffering that we'll sort of talk to in a second here, but also it creates that mental callus in your brain that I was sort of talking about earlier, where you go, your brain is smarter than us. It is us, essentially, I guess. But it just says, no, I've actually been here and done this. We can do this. And then you don't really give yourself, at least for me anyway, a choice to do any different.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is you just start building that repertoire of proof, essentially. And so it's before you even, like, your physical can go so much further, because often it's like, and now it's got to a point, which I think I said on a previous podcast, like it's like your body's like, oh, stop, you're so tired, like your hammies are cramping and stuff. It's like, yeah, but I haven't torn my hamstring yet. You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's got to a point that's like you take your training so far, and it's like, but for me, it's like, I know that when I get off the Stairmaster after doing 100 or 150 floors, my left hamstring always feels like it's about to snap. And so it's like, then when I go and carry out an elk quarter, hopefully right now as you're listening to this, and I'm halfway up and it's like, oh no, you should like get rid of the skull and come back and do a separate journey for that, because, you can feel your left hamstring tightening. It's like, yeah, but it always does that. You know what I mean? And then you start building this proof and you start just turning, and like, I like what Ayden said about those calluses. Like, you start getting this proof where, like, going back to the previous story I just told. So the next 2 days later, right, which I'd eaten, had a good night's sleep, and we went to get the rest of this elk. And I ended up carrying out in that load, I carried out a hind quarter. Admittedly, I didn't have the stuff, my like general day hunting, which was 15 kilos, but I carried out an elk skull, half of a front leg, a back strap, and an elk hind quarter in that exact same walkout up and over this mountain and down back to the car to get all the gear out. And it was actually enjoyable. You know what I mean? And I had someone there, we were G'ing up, like we'd already got the elk, so the easy work sort of, the hardest part in some ways is done. But, like the mentality was good. Like it took us forever. Like we ended up starting at like lunch, and it took us till like 1 a.m. or something. A little bit because my mate was probably slightly less fit than me. But overall, like it was an enjoyable process. And the thing is, like, you've already done this walk. Even that like little walk before it had prepared me. And so that's where, like, if you're not someone who runs, go and run a kilometer, go and run 2 kilometers, go and run 3 kilometers, then you run 5, then you do 10, and then all of a sudden you're running marathons. On the Stairmaster, like our dad has just started training. And I remember the first time he got on there, like nearly killed him, just going and doing like 30 or 40 floors, right? Dad's 60. Most of you guys are not 60, right? So it's like, get on the Stairmaster, just start doing the Stairmaster. And then after a while, you can do 30 floors, 50 floors, 100 floors. Okay, just put your general hunting backpack on. Probably for most of you, it's going to weigh 5 to 7 kilos. Okay, and then chuck a 5 kilo plate in it, and then put a 10 kilo plate in it. And then all of a sudden, you're someone that, by now you're jacked, looking great, feeling good, have an ultra six pack. But also, it's like you're someone that, couldn't walk 30 floors up the Stairmaster without breaking into a sweat and turning the immediate area into a swimming pool. And now you've got 25 kilos on your back and you're walking down the street like you're about to go get a soy decaf latte. Like, and it's one of these things that, like, for me, with these trips, it's like the more you can put into it physically beforehand, the more you can get out of it. But then that also then, hinges off and compounds the mental side of things, where it's like, okay, you've done harder things than this before. So when you go to, You might be tired, you might be calorically deficit, it's raining, it's miserable, and it's like, no, like, don't do this. It's just like, get up, go outside, go and do it. And I think, all that training beforehand, like, definitely helps for me. Like, personally, training in the mountains and these backpack hunts, like, the only thing that I've personally found that comes pretty close. Like, I think running is really good for it, but I think that next step is the Stairmaster, and then I think then the ultimate is obviously the Stairmaster with a backpack, because it's just like the closest thing to replicating it. But there is plenty of other things that definitely help in terms of, like, weight training and that type of thing. But it just depends on what your end goal is. Like, we're obviously talking about backpack hunting and hunting here, but like, if it's just getting outside and actually being fit and improving your life, then just go for a walk with your partner first, and then do it, then run 50 meters and then walk back, and then, run 200 meters and then go for a walk for a bit, like, just build it up slowly. Like, I think people's expectations of fitness is like, oh, I used to be fit when I was 20, so I should be able to just go for a run and smash out like 5Ks, and they work, they run 500 meters, die. It's pretty deflating. They feel like crap the next day because every muscle in their body hurts for the next week, and then they stop doing it and they go back eating Tim Tams. Like, just promise yourself you're going to do it for a month and work into it slowly, and I think more people would be willing to do it.
I think just also, like, understanding that, you can be starting at, 0. Say you're 120 kilos and you should be 100 kilos. You're 20 kilos overweight and you're like, nah, and you put off, like, doing that exercise because you're like, oh, I'm going to look stupid, feel dumb, I'm going to be in a world of pain. It's like, I'm 80 kilos, probably should be 80 kilos, feel relatively fit, like, have a great fitness relationship and whatnot. And every time I do a workout, I feel like absolute fucking shit. Like, there's no hiding from it. And that's where I think this chosen suffering, not necessarily that it's suffering, but it's like doing hard things that you make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, or doing something that you don't necessarily want to do. Again, this comes back to that feelings thing that I was saying earlier. There's not many times in a day where I'm like, hell yeah, I get to go to gym. I feel absolutely great. My knee's not sore from yesterday. My back's, loose. I have so much time to throw towards a killer workout. I wish that was the case, but a lot of the time it's just, I know that I'm going to get benefits from going to training. And it's once I start training, or sometimes it's afterwards. And that's where I just want to emphasize, like, the way that things sometimes feel at the moment or in this current time isn't always a reflection of how they're going to feel after the fact. So, again, the pack out, for example, like, I've done some really big pack outs with James, and I remember them feeling like, this is the hardest thing ever. I don't necessarily want to do this again. Hunting sucks. But then that's the very... So apologies. I think we just had a bit of an interruption, and we'll probably just jump back a second or two here. But I think what I was saying was, we've had a symphony of dogs going off and sirens and different things. So hopefully we've just come back and intervened for a second there. Dished out a few disciplines, and anyway, we've got some quiet again. But what I was trying to say was, I think I was likening it to some of these pack outs where, the way things feel at the time that you're doing it could be the hardest pack out ever. But it's not always a reflection of how things will feel after the fact, if that makes sense. So you might have 4 out of 5 days of a hunt be the worst, shittest weather, but then you shoot something on the 5th day and it's suddenly the best hunt you've ever been on, because in retrospect, in hindsight, you can assess it differently from your couch after having a warm shower, sitting with your partner, showing them a few cool photos, going, that was actually bloody cool. I'm really glad I did that. Whereas for 4 days, if you could take you back there and time travel, you'd be like, get the fuck off this mountain. This sucks. Why am I doing it? I'm selling my bow. I'm never going hunting again. I'm going to Fiji next week with my partner. No more hunting trips. And that's just where, like, I guess this chosen suffering, as I was trying to say earlier, is really important. And what I was saying earlier about, my ability personally to hold myself really accountable is one of my best strengths. And again, it comes back to, qualities such as discipline, consistency, just a not quitting sort of attitude. And that all comes back to just having a good regimen and, I guess, relationship with fitness. So there are a lot of days that I don't feel like training, but I've just gone, the one thing that I can do for myself, like for Ayden Doumtsis personally today, is actually go and train, because I know that Ayden tomorrow is going to appreciate it. And there's certain things like I want to be a dad in the future. I just want to have a good relationship with food, with physical exercise, like with hunting. And I know that one of the best things that are going to get me to that point and enable me to keep going with all these things that I want to do in my life is one, mental, attitude and stuff, which I think I've sort of got. But the biggest thing is going to be physical and like status and fitness. And I just wanted to rattle off a few exercises that I think people can do. And this isn't like go to gym and spend 2 hours at the gym, do a set, look at your phone, do a set, look at your phone. This is stuff that like you can genuinely do a lot of this stuff from your house without weights. Grab a 10 kilo dumbbell set and you can do that. And this is coming from someone that's been, I've trained, done the 100 kilo bench presses, the X 100 kilo squats, all this deadlifts and stuff. And it comes back to just like trying to do anything that builds up your like aerobic capacity and basically improves your lactate threshold like within the body, so that for these hunts, your body's not going, holy shit, I've never experienced this before. And sit there and do like air squats for 30 seconds and your legs, regardless of who you are going to be burning. Like I'll happily run 5 to 10 Ks, but then get me to sit there and do, Bulgarian squats, Bulgarian like sort of lunges or, anything like that. And my legs and quads and everything are burning. So, I think rucking is really important. Stuff that James was saying about putting weights in packs and just walking up and down hills or walking flat areas, whatever it may be. An assault bike is really cool. Doing stairs, just going to gym in general. But exercises such as squats, deadlifts, lunges, Bulgarians, all that core training as well, lower back, are going to be really, really important for the hunting side of things and what we do. But one thing that if people recall, and some of our regular listeners might, from way back, like one of our first episodes that we did, it was called Resolutions, where I think at the time I was living pretty much remotely out of my car and I just had a 10 to 15 kilo dumbbell set. And what I was doing was it started out as like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And every minute I would change to a different exercise and I'd just rattle through whether it was 5 exercises. So it might have been bicep curls, shoulder press, push-ups, some form of a plank, some form of like an abdominal V-sit, something like that, and just interchange between those 5 exercises. Push it all the way through to 10 if I had in, squats, or if there was a bar nearby, I'd jump up on someone's, scaffolding, for example. It was a DIY sort of gym, and I started off sometimes even at 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. So I'm telling you now, like literally anyone can do it. And even with the push-ups, it doesn't have to be, 20 push-ups or 50 push-ups in that time. It can be 5. It's literally just starting is the main thing. And hopefully that's what people are getting across here, is like the message of just start. And suddenly, 30 seconds on. So if you understand that, for 30 seconds you're working, you're doing that exercise. And then, for the next 30 seconds, you're just sitting there catching your breath. As soon as it goes to, a minute 1 or a minute, you're starting the next exercise until a minute 30. At a minute 30, you pause till 2 minutes. And you just do that for as long as you mentally say, I'm going to give today 20 minutes of my time to exercise. And really it's 10 minutes of actual work if you do the 30 on, 30 off. But I promise you, regardless of how fit you are, it's going to wreck you. Like, because for someone that does 5 push-ups and that's their max, someone that can do 20 push-ups in that time and that's their max, you're doing it for as intense as you can for 30 seconds. And then for those of you that want to build up, you can go from 40 seconds on to 20 seconds off. And again, it doesn't sound like much, but that, 10 seconds less break and 10 seconds more work is so big. And for me, like that's where I was sort of up to. And the 20 seconds is basically like you drop the weight, get down on the mat and get ready to start doing push-ups. Like there's very little rest with 20 seconds off. By the time you catch your breath, you're sort of working again. And, there's hundreds of variations from this. If anyone want, exercises to do, just send us a message and we'll send you a bit of a list of 10 exercises. It's so easy with a dumbbell set that you can do it. Again, you don't even need dumbbells. You can do a lot of stuff like free weights, no weights whatsoever. But there's even, exercises like every minute on the minute you do 10 push-ups and you do that for 10 minutes. So you're doing 100 push-ups in 10 minutes. And again, for some of you, it might sound like, no way, I'm never going to do that. For some of you, it might sound like, that's easy, a piece of piss. But I guarantee you, when you're doing 10 push-ups every minute for a minute or on the minute, as you go on and say you're at push-up 70, instead of getting 30 seconds rest like you were in the first few sets, you're now getting 15 seconds. Your body is working under fatigue. And it's these little things and these chosen suffering and these chosen hardships and, again, doing these exercises where you start to actually build that muscle memory. And then later in the field, when you're like, oh, I can't get up that hill, but there's a rutting bore and I really want to, your body goes, oh, I've actually had this lactic acid and I've had this shortness of breath and I've had this saliva in the corner of my mouth. And you go, I can push through this. And maybe I can't go any faster, but I can keep enduring and just go at this pace forever, potentially. So it doesn't always have to be, heavier sets or heavier weights or anything like that. But sometimes it's just doing it for a little bit longer or more reps within the same time frame to build a bit of endurance. So that would be my main takeaways as far as fitness. Not everyone has to be like a bodybuilder or anything like that, but you see guys particularly and I don't want this to sound like a shot, but you see guys like Remy Warren who literally looks like the most average human in the world in sense of his muscles aren't, he's not struggling to put on t-shirts and stuff like some of these other guys in the US that are bodybuilders and stuff and then go and shoot bows and whatever. He's just a guy that has so much mental fortitude where he's going to outcompete anyone, regardless of how fit they are, because he just knows what it takes to get it done on the mountain, and he's done it hundreds, if not thousands of times already. And that's sort of what I think a lot of us could strive for is, not crazy workouts, but just keeping mentally and physically fit enough to do what's required for hunting, because it isn't like an Olympic sport, but it is one of those most testing, I guess, endurance, events or pursuits that there is out there.
Whether you're making your way up a scree cliff or hiking a distant trail, you want to be confident in the boots that you wear. And for Ayden and I, that means lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX 3s for over 5 years now, and we've never even had a blister. We've teamed up with the Lower team to extend their generosity to you to get you a unique 10% off code. By using the code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. We know you're going to love them.
There you go. We're dishing out Twin Elements fitness programs. I would love to write a fitness program for someone. Like if someone wants some real suck, it's not I'm not talking bodybuilder stuff, not necessarily getting big, but if you want a 30 to 45 minute program for a gym or home session, and I mean, obviously Ayden's got the same thing. I would happily write you a couple of sessions of just this is going to hurt. I'm not going to lie. If you want to build some mental fortitude, I've got some stuff for you. But happily help people out wherever we can. Whether it be with dieting, whether it be with training, whether it be with motivation, keeping people on track. We want to build this community. We want to help you guys as much as we can. So, reach out to us. Instagram's probably the best for me. Same for you?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think Instagram's probably the best.
Perfect. And we'll get you guys ironed out with washboard abs. Not really. I think what Ayden was saying about Remy's pretty spot on. We're not here to train to be necessarily super aesthetically pleasing, and I think a lot of it sometimes it just comes with that. But I think a lot of it.
Wrapping up, James thinks he's a model.
I think it just comes with it. But I think also, just training and being prepared is super important. That's what I was trying to get to. Thank you, Ayden. Well, wrapping up now, if you legends have a question that you want answered on a future podcast, please email us at info@twinelements.com.au with the subject line FAQ, or send us a message on Instagram at the Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors account. And we will get to you in a future podcast. If you send one at the moment, because we're in the US, we will get to it and reply to you personally in the future. But as you're hearing this, but we will definitely get to you in the future. So this question's come from Hooks and Hounds. Hey mate, I'm a massive fan of the content you guys put out. What camera gear and setups do you use?
So essentially, James and I run pretty much all Sony gear with the exception of a few Sigma lenses, which are very much interchangeable. Sigma is a great brand of lens, often a lot cheaper, still have a lot of the same really good attributes such as, being relatively waterproof, indestructible, all these sorts of things. And the Sigma lenses basically interchange. You just have to change your what's called a mount to go with whether you're a Canon, Nikon, Sony, in our instance, type of body. And these lenses change and fit in for there. And they're often just the biggest thing for us is that they come in a lot cheaper than the Sony gear, essentially. So James has the Sony S3, which is more of a film sort of camera, very much a cinematic camera with amazing like bit rate, color, all these different types of things. Has a lower megapixel, being around 12 megapixels, like for images more so. But for those of you that don't necessarily understand that, megapixels is just the amount of pixels, I guess, that it goes into the image, or the clarity of the image. And it's just that because it's got 12, the pixels are sort of, I guess, if I could give it a very broad, not scientific description, it'd be that the pixels to form an image are just placed further apart to cover a bigger area, would probably be the way that I'd describe it. And I'm sure I might get some corrections on that. But we often pair this with like the shorter lenses. So a lot of the lenses like our 24 to 70 mil Sigma, which we run as a bit of a run and gun sort of style lens, a lot of like our interviewing pieces to the camera sort of lens. All of that B-roll, cinematic sort of, walking scenes is generally filmed with that camera setup and the 24 to 70 mil lens. We then also have a Sony A7R4, which is, so in comparison, that's more of a photographing camera, but it also records in 4K, has incredible, bit rate, color, all this type of stuff as well. So it's very much a cinematography camera as well. It just has 42 megapixels, which means that, we can take photos and then crop in on them, and it just gives us a bit more versatility. And to be honest, a lot more of the photos that we use on like the website for our prints and things, if possible, we try and take with the A7R4 just because it gives us a bit more wiggle room in the images side of things. And for that reason, we often pair it with our telephoto setup, which is a 150 to 600 mil Sigma lens. Again, can't remember now if it's a sporting one, but it is a great lens. It's not the best lens by any means. There are people out there with prime lenses with which let in a lot more light and, a lot more expensive. But we've chosen to just have a lens that we can sort of bash, to be quite frank, use in the rain, use in the dust, whatever it may be, and just get the shots. And that's very much what we're about here at Twin Elements, is just getting the shots and using gear that we can sort of, it's expensive, don't get us wrong, but sort of throw around a little bit. And that's just hunting is very, very hard on the gear. And that's what we're good at, is the hunting side of things. We are constantly learning with gear, and it's a bit of a steep learning curve when stuff costs thousands and thousands of dollars, but we're getting better and better with it, as you would see in our videos. So that little handheld sort of run and gun setup that I mentioned earlier, we'll often pair sometimes with a DJI gimbal, which we're running at the moment with a couple of extra batteries. So that just leads to like smoother, better sort of tracking, following scenes for on the mountain, more of those scenes of panning for scenery and mountainside sort of things. Otherwise, we try and do it handheld as best as possible, but you can sort of notice the difference. The DJI gimbal just is, another bit of gear to carry around, another bit of gear to break, and it also obviously adds to the weight. So that larger setup that I mentioned that was involving the telephoto lens is pretty much always run on a tripod. Then we can do things like warp stabilize in post if it's really, really windy, because some of these setups might be 5-6 kilos with a tripod, camera, lens, and the wind just catches it. And when the wind's ripping 20 to 30, knots or whatever on an exposed mountainside, it's pretty unforgiving. And no matter how good your tripod is, you still get little, vibrations and things like that. So the last thing I'd sort of probably mention from me that revolves and makes up most of our camera setup and kit would be that we have recently branched out and purchased a 70 to 200 mil Sony lens, which for us was a bit of an in-between lens, because we found that the 24 to 70 just didn't have enough zoom to sort of really capture the shot, especially in some of these, elk hunts and things where we were calling bulls in from, say, 100 meters away, and we didn't really want to be using the tripod because they can spot you that close. But then we wanted to be able to zoom in and catch them at between 50 and 100 bugling and mucking around there and stuff. But then also be able to zoom right out and catch, the moments once we shoot something at 18 meters, just say. So that's where this lens has been absolutely essential for us. It's sort of an in-betweener, as I said, and it is great to use handheld. It's pretty light, really good for low light capabilities, and takes amazing images and both video. So we've been running that lens for a little while, since the start of the year, and it was essential for us over the red deer rut, where we were able to capture a number of kills on camera, which you'll all be seeing shortly. And hopefully we can do the same this September, using it a lot for those spot and stalks on mule deer and pronghorn, where it's hard to sort of set up the tripod at 30 meters and capture things on film, or alternatively call a big bull elk into 30 meters, but try and get a bit of that zoom lens footage at 60 meters. It should just be able to fill in a lot more gaps and get us a better product in terms of media content that we're able to acquire.
Just adding to that quickly, I'd probably say with the A7R4, if you're mainly going to be doing a lot of filming and stuff, I may hesitant you to stick away from that. It has been a really, really good lens for us, but a couple of times we have had issues, and I know a few people that have had it with overheating. If you've listened to the podcast regularly, you would have heard that it overheated when we were filming the Bantang series, and that could have cost us a potential hunt. So if you're just doing recreational stuff, taking photos, filming the kids or whatever, and just want a really, really good lens, and all, for sure, jump in and grab that really versatile lens. That 42 megapixels is really good, and we use it often on the big lens because we can, screenshot live footage, and then it's still 42 meg. So, but if you're doing that higher end stuff, and that risk of failure is a bit too high for us.
James mentioned their lens a couple of times, but the Sony A7R4 is in fact a camera body that you screw a lens into. So everything else he said was, correct. It's just some of you might be scratching your heads going, A7R4 lens, what's that mean? And the A7R4 is a camera body, just to clarify.
Yeah, sorry about that one. Also adding that, one Sigma 150 to 600 is an awesome lens. I think Ayden was underselling it. It's about $1,500, which at that, there's not that many options in that big 150 to 500 or 150 to 600. And if you start looking at primes, you're looking at about 10 grand for a camera for an f2.8. That 150 to 600 Sigma, I think it's about $1,500, and we've got two of them. Ayden's got one, I've got one, and really it's just to enable us to, we get some incredible, all the wildlife stuff that you see is pretty much with that. And we get some incredible videos with that lens. They've been tried, tested. I think Ayden's is about 5 or 6 years old. Mine's just a newer one. If you're in the market, can't speak more highly of that. And that new Sony lens that we just got, 70 to 200, the glass and quality on that is just so, it's too sharp at f2.8. We've got a pretty good kit now. Cover a fair few of the bases. Obviously, you can always get better ones, but as a general, that's what we're running for all our filming and audio needs. So I would just like to say thank you guys for listening to this podcast. Has been a bit of a longer one, but a fair few things to cover off there on obviously mental toughness and just rounding out things that we've learned from our time in the US. Hopefully we've been successful. As we've mentioned on previous podcasts, we are over there right now. So hopefully on the socials, you've seen that we've got amongst a few critters. If it's been this long that you're hearing this and we haven't put anything up, I'd be pretty disappointed that it's not gone the way that we would hoped. But hopefully with all this preparation that we've been talking about, Ayden and I are well and truly amongst all of it. So stay tuned on the socials. And if you send us anything during this period, we will endeavour to get back to you. It's just that we're obviously previously occupied, hopefully getting amongst a few critters.
Before we sign off, James and I just wanted to take a couple of seconds of your time to mention a few new additions to our partners, and these are just some quality brands that we're now working with. You may have seen recently, before I went away to the US, was smashing through about 70 kilograms of prime venison mince and just bits of offcuts, back leg, whatever it was, a bit of neck meat. And the Carnivore Collective Australia mincer that I'm running, absolutely devoured that and churned it out really, really quickly. I think I put through about 70 kilos in about 30 minutes or so, and it was absolutely awesome to just be able to do that, cryovac it, and then, get rid of it all back in the freezer and have plenty of, perfectly rationed meals to come. So make sure you guys are checking those out. As I said, we're going to be getting some discount codes to you guys. We haven't had a chance to sort of record ads and all that type of stuff, but we will have that coming to you once we're back from the US. The next brand I guess I wanted to chat about is Walk and Stalk Game Bars. Again, very new to us. I tried it on the Chiddle Deer and was very, very pleasantly surprised. These guys have created a super lightweight game bar that has 7-in-1, I guess, versatility from, being able to strap a binocular to it and glass, to put a shooting stick component on it, use it as a trekking pole, use it as a game bar to hang game, use it as a drag bar, use it as something to prop the legs open when gutting animals. There really is so many options and alternative uses for this game bar, which is what I really like. It's made out of carbon, which is super strong and comes in all less than 1 kilo with the lift kit. So the lift kit, I hear you asking what that is basically a pulley system that enables you to, with one person, lift animals up to 250 kilos. So I did it pretty easily with a Chiddle Stag, which would have weighed probably around 100 kilos, guts in, nothing altered, and was able to lift it up on safari and then subsequently get the cape off and do all the meat prep and all that type of stuff very, very cleanly out in the field. All you essentially need is a overhanging branch and you're good to go. So again, we'll have some discount codes for you guys and hopefully get a bit more content and stuff while we're away in the US to show you guys just how well that works. But I can see that, as well as some of these brands that we're talking about, becoming an integral part of our sort of kill kit, I guess, and just delivering fresh, clean meat to our homes. And that's where I guess the last brand that we'll mention is Iron Gate Knives. So those legends are an Australian-based company who create hand-forged knives, very much customizable. And if you guys are subscribed to them on Instagram or have subscribed to their newsletter/email on their website, you'll see that they are regularly doing knife drops with some incredible bits of kit. So they were good enough to send us out a couple of knives. James and I have been using them, and their quality is just what I'm most impressed with. If you guys are looking for a knife to get someone as a gift and then have in your family for generations to come, I can't vouch for these guys enough. They've been a pleasure to work with. And again, I broke down that same Chiddle Stag with the one knife and did from all the gutting, caping, deboning, removed the skull, then back at camp, broke down all the meat and, cut all the bits of muscle into, different cuts and things and took it off the bone with the one knife and didn't even sharpen it just because I wanted to, which is a bit of neglect, to be honest. Like normally I'd be sharpening it every couple of strokes just to keep that knife nice and sharp and not, basically be too destructive to the gear. But this was just a bit of a test to see how sharp and well that blade would sort of maintain its edge. And again, I was thoroughly impressed and going to be taking one of those over to the USA. So we'll hopefully have some discount codes available for those brands soon. I just wanted to mention them so that you guys are all getting familiar and can check them out. But yeah, we will be back in middle of October. So we'll be replying to you guys and getting all of that info to you shortly.
An event to chuck into the calendar is on the 11th and 12th of October, which is not too far around the corner. The Wild Deer Expo will be running for the first time in a couple of years down in Victoria there. So if you're in Victoria or if you're going to be in the area, come down, have a trip. It's in Lardner Park, which is southeast Melbourne. And come down. Ayden and I are going to be there. Come and say hey to us. There's some incredible shops that are going to be there, whether you're into hunting, fishing, just the outdoors. There's going to be some cooking demos. There's heaps of stuff going on. So come down, say hello. And yeah, it's going to be an awesome day for the outdoor industry as a whole. So make sure to get your tickets online at www.deerexpo.com.au. Like I said, first time it's been back in a couple of years. So let's really get around it, support it, and hopefully we'll see you all there.
Last one from us. James and I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of you legends who regularly tune in and listen to the podcast. If you're new here, please subscribe, review, and rate the podcast. It helps us out immensely and basically just keeps us ticking along doing what we love. And that is basically just growing this hunting community here in Australia, working with like-minded brands and individuals, and hopefully inspiring that next generation of hunters through whether it's, just being supportive on social media, being friendly enough to answer questions, hopefully, after listening to this podcast, sending out a few, exercise or fitness regimes, things like that, we just want to share in everyone's success and keep growing this lifestyle and this community, which has given so much back to James and I. So thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. We'll see you next week.